All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios as this podcast rolls along into the month of August. A lot of great tennis, a lot of great content out there on this show. Joined now by a special guest. We're always widening the bubble, and on this show, anytime something touches the tennis sphere, we want to learn more about it and discuss a really cool concept right now with Brian Doxtator. He's the co-founder and CEO of Commonwealth, doing tremendous things where you can invest in players and athletes in several sports, now up to 3. Tennis was the latest addition to golf and horse racing. Brian, thanks for joining the podcast. I'm excited to chat with you and, more than anything, learn more about this cool concept.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So first off, and we're going to get to your backstory and the tennis side of things, but I think at its core level, this company, this idea comes at the problem of funding in sports and how expensive it can be to get your career off the ground, specifically in individual sports. When did that become a passion for you, something that you thought could be a business opportunity? What was the first time you looked at it like, okay, funding is a real problem, I can help solve that?
Yeah, it was a slightly different angle at the very beginning. It came from another company doing this for what I would call static assets, like cars and art and things like this. And I really studied that business because I thought it was cool, this intersection of passion and something that you could have access to, and of course a potential for financial sort of engagement in your passion. But I invested in a few of their things, and then that was it. There was no story, there was no journey, there was nothing happening. And I just thought, how can we apply this model to something that both helps whatever it is you're investing in, but also provides like a journey and a story, an experiential kind of calendar that, the investment is just the beginning of the story, not the moment. And so when I was thinking about Commonwealth, I pretty quickly narrowed it down to sports and music, and chose sports for a million reasons, not least of which I'm a huge sports fan. Yeah. So, and then just on the financial empowerment side, I mean, you have a handful, everybody focuses on these stories. Even in the NIL space right now, you're hearing all of these stories of like the quarterbacks or the big contracts. Yeah. But once you come off of that, it like drops off a cliff. And the financial need out there, even in team sports, especially you talk about minor league baseball and a lot of other team sports, it's really there. And there's an opportunity to solve that across huge groups of people and create this invested fan base that powers athletes into their careers. So golf and tennis seemed like the natural starting point, given their individual sports, and they're very expensive and hard to crack through. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to provide funding, provide a journey to the fans, and really, this connecting fiber and kind of a 21st century fan club.
It's exciting, and I'm not just saying that. I can't really speak to golf, but for tennis, just talking to one of my colleagues who calls matches, and he's like, the players have never been better, coming up through the ranks, the college level, the minor leagues, so to speak. So there is a talent level that's developing, and you'd like to see, as in tennis's case, the prize money's gotten better, but it's still tough to get off the ground. In your case in particular, though, and I looked up your backstory, Western Michigan, got the finance degree and the law degree as well, but with looking at your story and looking at entrepreneurship, there's a lot of respect I have for that level, because you were somebody that had the background, had the ability to, I wouldn't say settle in, but could have had an office job, could have done very well for yourself. What was it about your creative spirit that even before Commonwealth, you wanted to just try things and start companies?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because I did start there. The first kind of third of my career was in mergers and acquisitions, corporate strategy, and it would have been a very easy path to take. And quite honestly, this is my mid-20s now. We're going back a few years, but it was the learning curve that sort of stalled out for me, and I'm kind of an obsessive learner and somebody that loves to lean into things. And then, in corporate strategy and M&A, you're kind of like an in-house broker almost. You're buying a company and then you're passing it off to somebody else. And every time we would do that, I would think, man, like we had this plan. And then if they would veer from the plan, I would go, oh, I wanted to do that. I wanted to build that company. So the itch to get on what we would call the operating side just wouldn't go away. I come from a family of entrepreneurs as well. So in the house growing up, I always joke we had Business Week on the coffee table. We didn't have Sports Illustrated. So that seed was always planted pretty early on. And then from New York, I went to San Francisco and joined another startup very early, pre-revenue, fifth employee, and just got the bug and have been on the operating kind of early business model side since. And there's really nothing better, in my opinion. It changes every day. There's nobody there, nothing to fall back on. Right. You have to push through. So you really have to be somebody that just wants to get after it at all times. And, I think Commonwealth is, I'm so lucky, the previous startup and some parts of my previous career, while being very interesting, they didn't really snap me out of bed. And Commonwealth combines so many things that I love. Of course, sports, and then investing, startup, technology companies. So it's really like if you were to do a Venn diagram of me as a professional, I think Commonwealth is really that. And I feel like it's something that I'm supposed to be doing.
And it's a good story, too, because I read on the bio, Western Michigan, shout out to Kalamazoo, that you got your first job a leg up on people from like Ivy League schools because you felt like they taught you how to actually perform there as opposed to just studying. That's a good lesson to people that didn't necessarily go to the most prestigious schools, still good schools, that doesn't have to set you back when you get to the workforce in any field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was a serial learner. I was reading constantly outside of school, pushing my professors. Like, you get out of it what you put into it, and I put a ton into it, especially once I kind of figured out my way a little bit. But yeah, even you mentioned Kalamazoo. I mean, Nats at the zoo, and there's a tennis story as well, just growing up around it. But yeah, I mean, again, the entrepreneurial side of things, it's something that I get a ton of excitement about, and I get a lot of value out of just being able to push into new areas.
So 2019 was when you kind of made the pivot. Commonwealth was first planted, and like any good story out there, or good professional story, there was some networking, there was some friendships that started. I think your buddy was the equestrian type in the group, but it started with horse racing. Do I have that correct?
That's
Everything was there. How did it go from? Or how did you first get into the business of horse racing? Were you a fan? Did you kind of know the ins and outs, or was that a steep learning curve as well?
Definitely a steep learning curve. Horse racing is a steep learning curve for almost anybody. Horse racing started for me all the way back in 05, 06. I was living in Baltimore. I was an investment banking analyst, and we did a big group outing to the Preakness every summer, or I guess spring. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. I was there as a fan. I didn't know anything about horse racing or horses at all. But I just thought it was really cool, and it just stayed with me. And so every year I would either go to some races or I would watch the Triple Crown Breeders' Cup. And then I mentioned the other company doing this with cars and art and stuff like that. And I was starting to noodle on the model. And I was out at Santa Anita here in LA, just with friends. Again, no idea what I'm doing. I didn't even know you're supposed to bet on jockeys. I didn't know anything. I was there for fun. And I just started looking around, and I thought, wait a minute. I thought, they're really expensive. They're very complicated. So even if you have the funds, you're really not best served to just go buy a racehorse. Like, that would be a great way to throw money away. And of course, that experiential calendar that I referenced, right? There's races, there's all these updates that happen throughout. So if you were to buy a piece of one, you get a lot of updates and a lot of that kind of fun, kind of fan side. And so I just started studying horse racing from a business perspective. And there was a surprising amount of publicly available information out there. All the auctions are public. All the race results are public. Even a lot of the stallion kind of breeding results are publicly available. And I started modeling it out and thinking, okay, there's a business here. This is a good launch sport for us. And I always say I knew one guy that knew anything about horse racing, and that's Chase Chamberlain, our co-founder and head of racing. And I'm a little bit older than him, but we grew up together. I was very close friends with his older sister. And I DM'd him on Instagram. I slid into his DMs, and I was just like, hey, I have this idea. I'd be curious to bounce it off of you. And I sent him all these boring SEC documents. It was the most boring email pitch ever. And he got back to me with like 20 questions and loved the idea. And so it was really Chase and our combined efforts kind of pushing into horse racing. And just pounding the pavement in Kentucky from there. And it's, again, that entrepreneurial spirit thing. We got a lot of no's, a ton of no's early on. A lot of this won't work. But we knew that it would. We knew there was a market there. And yeah, you can get a lot of no's if you get one yes. That's what they always say. And so,
Yeah, and again, a good example, everyone out there listening, that DMs can work if done right. And I like the idea that you're walking into any area and you're like a cyborg with business. How can this work? How can I do this? Just asking questions. It's a great origin story. And that last thing you touched on, I wanted to, if you could expand, you get a lot of no's as an entrepreneur. You have to be able to learn from that and keep moving. How do you keep your head up and keep your spirits up when dealt with no's, which probably come a lot more often than yeses?
Oh my goodness, yeah, especially early on. Yeah. Now everybody sees it and they go, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea."
Yeah.
Early on, that was not. I got a lot of "what are you doings."
Yeah.
In horse racing, in anything, when you're getting a lot of no's, you have to have the conviction first and foremost. You have to have the conviction that what you're doing, you're onto something, and you have to keep pushing, and that there is a path, and where there's a will, there's a way, kind of stuff. In horse racing, we were talking to a lot of, I want to choose my words, a little older folks that were a little stuck in their ways. And so the moment came, funny enough, we went to a company, WinStar, who's a partner of ours now. And the president of WinStar, who we had a connection with, he couldn't make the meeting. And so he sent his kind of young team in, and they all got it.
Yeah.
Because they were, they were our target market. And so it just took that one meeting and that one breakthrough for them to start to understand it. And then we went from there. We signed a partnership with them, and they provided us with some early horses that went on to some pretty notable success. And we just, from there, I mean, we were in stealth for almost 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, because the timeline matches up like 2022, that Country Grammar horse, it's a great name, by the way. It has the most earnings in horse racing for that calendar year. But then everyone knows you. If they're listening to this and they've heard of Commonwealth, it's probably because of Mage winning the Kentucky Derby in 2023. So before I get to the after effects, is there any feeling like being there and watching your horse win the Derby? I was thinking of this before, like the exhilarating, euphoric high probably can't be touched.
It can't be touched, cannot be touched. And we thought, I mean, the compare and contrast, Country Grammar won the Dubai World Cup, which is like a crown jewel of international horse racing. 4 times the purse amount as the Kentucky Derby. It's a huge event. And I mean, that was exhilarating on its own. I mean, it was just incredible. But I got 20 text messages and DMs, and I came home and I'm telling people, we won the Dubai World Cup. And people go, is that a big deal?
Right,
it's a pretty big deal. We win the Kentucky Derby. I had 800 text messages, I think 200 or 300 DMs, countless interviews. I mean, it was in complete insanity. But what was also cool about the Mage race in particular, both of them really, Country Grammar came from behind, but he was in 4th or 5th, so it was a bit more of a natural comeback. Mage was in 15th place on the backstretch.
And not a favorite to win. I want to point that out, too, is that this wasn't a horse that was coming in. I looked at this morning, like the pre odds, and I think a favorite got scratched. There was others up there, but not on the short list of horses people thought would win.
That's right. And what was really crazy on the odds is that favorite that got scratched, we almost beat him 2 races earlier. And so when he scratched, I thought our odds were going to go, we were going to become more of a favorite, and we went the opposite direction. So our entire ownership group and our kind of user base just like really bet him pretty hard. And then of course he comes out of the gate slow, which he did every single time. And it went from like, there's videos of course of us in the first half of the race. We're all kind of looking like, oh no. And then man, when he made the turn to the top of the stretch, he really put on a show. And so that made it even more exhilarating to just come from nowhere and then to have everybody around. I mean, we had 120 people in the race that day. We had, as far as we understand, in the history of the Kentucky Derby, the most people in the winner's circle. We had watch parties all across the country hosted by, our members and owners. We had a big party out here in LA. And really that's we talk about the funding platform. Commonwealth is really a twofold kind of business. There's the funding platform, which of course is our mechanism, both for the athlete, the racehorse owner, or the sports team. And then there's the events and entertainment content kind of stuff that's really, it's about audience building, brand building, and that experiential calendar again. And so I don't know that there's a better example we've had yet of the Derby weekend. They're just lighting up a national network of fans. And so that is certainly a day I think really all of us, all 500 or so owners will never forget.
Do you feel like that, I don't want to say legitimized, but it changed business overnight? Now you're in the mainframe. Now Commonwealth is known. Did that change everything?
It did, yes. If Dubai put us on the map, the Derby kind of launched us into the national psyche, so to speak. So we're very fortunate in that way. Horse racing is a difficult sport to have that level of success in. To have it that early is certainly not something lost upon us. But yeah, it did. I think I think in the end, 10 or 12,000 people signed up in the next 48 hours. Oh. I mean, I think for 3 or 4 weeks I was doing nothing but interviews and podcasts. I was hardly at the office, so it was a pretty fun time, and it really worked out well because we had launched golf right before the Derby, so we had golf athletes in there, and so when the national kind of sports media started looking at us, they saw another sport there, and so they, I think, came to us knowing that there was a bigger picture for us, which of course is now starting to be become very real. So.
Brian Doxtator here on Tennis Channel Inside In. He's the co-founder and CEO of Commonwealth, a sports investment platform that allows fans to buy shares to back athletes' careers. Getting into the tennis space, which is where we're starting at right now as we record this. It was a shot that you called. I saw the sound clip where you said, we're going to be in tennis probably in the next year or two. So this was on your radar for a while. What was that process like? Why did tennis make sense, and why does it make sense going forward for Commonwealth?
Yeah, so golf was the second sport, as we've chatted about, and they really mapped together quite well. They're individual sports. There are no contracts coming out of college or if you're going straight from high school. Other than a very select few people, there really isn't any endorsement money either. And so even if even for a family with means, if you're talking about $50,000 to $75,000 a year, that is a lot of money for really basically anybody. And so the same challenges exist in both sports. And so we had always intended to take it to tennis. I come from more of the golf world. And so between that sound clip and today, it was me looking for somebody to help us sort of launch into tennis. And our head of tennis is Stephen Armitage, who I met through another mutual friend, Marty Fish, who we just announced an offering with.
It's kind of more of a golf guy now, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He and I met playing golf.
Yeah, of course.
And it just became, probably if anything, our engagement with Stephen really accelerated it. I was thinking of it more probably end of the year or even early part of next year. But once Stephen came on board, the doors started opening up, and he really framed it in tennis very well for us. It went from, I think we at Commonwealth understood the challenge and we understood the problem we were trying to solve, but how exactly to solve it in tennis and where to start, I think was maybe the missing ingredient. And so I think we're on our way there. And I think going forward, it makes sense. I mean, one thing Stephen and I talk a lot about, and you touched earlier, is the NCAA path for professional tennis has really grown.
It's never been better, the depth of the pool. And even in the pro game, you can see the results of players that went to college and how much better they're doing. The other side of it, too, is the independent contractor side. Like, prize money's up. It's great. Love what these tournaments are doing. But the average fan, even the above-average fan, probably doesn't realize just what it costs these players to travel, to have a team. And then suddenly you get to the point where if you are cutting costs on this to save money, you're missing out and you're falling behind the curve.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, we like to say, I mean, in tennis, I think it's around $50,000 to $75,000 a year. If you're playing a really full schedule, it's probably even more than that. And a question I always love to ask the athlete first is, if you were to do this on your own, is there anything that you would have to think twice about and or forego, whether it's coaching, physio, mental, whatever it is? And most of the time that answer is yes, because it is so expensive. And Commonwealth allows them to say yes to those things. We want to give them the runway to make the decisions that they believe will put them in the best position. We're not trying to do short. I mean, we would, but our endeavor is to do slightly longer term deals to give them that runway. We don't want to do a 1-year deal and halfway through the season it's not going well, and that pressure is right back on their shoulders. And so, we're looking at 2, 3, 4, and even sometimes longer funding deals. To give them that ability to go kind of the long path and do what's best for them.
And talking to Stephen Armitage and just people in the tennis world is a huge step that I'm glad you guys are taking, because any sport has specialists. They have people that you can be the sharpest, as in your case, with all these sharp business minds. The world of tennis is so unique, as is every sport, that you need people that are on the ground level that know the inner workings of a game that, unless you're full in it, it's hard to really comprehend.
It's going to take a while,
I think there's another way to look at this too, and I was talking to some people about your company, and that's you finding these players that are on the lower level. Is there a scenario where if they accelerate to the top, is it time for them to move on too? Is there like lifespans of, okay, this player has gotten really good, maybe it's time to opt out?
Yes, we do have some of those terms in the contract. All the terms are short term by nature in terms of the sharing component. They'd be probably 5 or 6 years, and so the idea is that it does sunset at some point. But we have, one of my missions. I just want to say clearly, because I think sometimes people think that the share numbers could be very large. Our share numbers are kind of sub 30% on court only. So no endorsement deals are investors don't participate in off court earnings. But really, my mission and Commonwealth's mission is to eradicate predatory deals in sports completely. We've heard about it in baseball. We've heard about it in tennis. We've heard about it in golf. And everything we do is regulated by the SEC and FINRA. We're a regulated funding portal. All of our documents are public. They all go in the app, so investors can see it. And so I like to refer to that as like we're laying our cards on the table. And so by doing that, we can really confidently say that we're bringing a really fair deal to the athlete and where there's nothing to hide. And so, I think sometimes when you get these sort of private money men, so to speak, they at times can take advantage of an athlete in a moment of need. And we are trying to spin that on its head completely, offer really fair terms. And especially because our customers, our members, Commonwealth Nation, they're really coming to this not just from an ROI perspective. So if you have a 500 or 1,000 people invest in an athlete, we talk to them, and usually ROI is like the third or fourth thing.
They're fans too.
They're fans. They want to be entertained. They want to get to know the athlete. They get their weekly update, and they want to know what okay, you played tennis, good, bad, or otherwise. What else are you doing right now? Tell us about you. And so that's part of the ROI picture, so to speak, for them. So that allows us to come to the table with much better terms than most of the private market.
The app's great too. I was checking it out on the Apple Store. It's Commonwealth without the vowels in there. So definitely check that out. It's very easy. The interface is great. You can invest. It's a $50 minimum share. It's great. On that, a side note, I just had the follow-up question. It says it comes with premium access. What does that detail?
Yeah, it depends on the tournament and the circumstance, but usually it will be something like a meet and greet with the athlete. Typically, we'll get an allotment of tickets, and if we don't get an allotment, we'll just buy a pack. We have relationships with the various tournament operators, and then we do events. We do tons of events. Last year, we threw 50 events around the country and the world, hosted over 2,000 people at those events. The athletes will come to them at times, depending, schedule depending. And what's fun, a story I'd like to share just about the access. What's fun is that when you're playing, Garrett, for instance, our first tennis athlete, he's on the Challenger Tour. You go to those events, there aren't 50,000 people all scrambling for access. So you just fundamentally you get closer to it just by virtue of being there. But, an example I have from golf on the Corn Ferry Tour, which would be like the equivalent of the Challenger Tour. One of our players, Cooper, in the Dallas event, we had, I think, 30 or 40 people there, and he had his own gallery. Nobody has galleries.
And he went to Baylor, right? He's got the Texas roots.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's awesome.
Family there. Yeah. 2-time All-American, really a talented player. And he's one of the only guys there with a gallery. Like, how cool is that? He walks around and he's got fans following him, and you talk to him afterwards, and it makes him feel like he's the guy, you know what I mean? And so I envision filling up Challenger stands. Then, of course, as Garrett and our future tennis athletes break through into the top 100 and get into the main draws, like, we're going to be bringing crowds of people out and cheering them on and stuff like that. So with that comes, various access, again, that changes based on the tournament.
Well, the big thing, too, with athletes now, the word that keeps coming up is their brand and growing their outreach. And this is a great way to do it, especially for players that are starting from the ground floor. It's one thing if you're the prodigy that has the marketing campaign behind you, but it's hard to think of a better way to grow your brand from the lower levels of any sport than with an app like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what earlier I mentioned the twofold part. The other side, the funding platform, and really like the brand and audience platform. And there's a few parts to that. The most consistent one for the athlete, I think, is those weekly video updates. They can be 10, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it is. But we talk to our athletes like these are reps. Like if the success comes, you're going to have microphones in your face pretty often. And these are reps. Talk about yourself. Get fluid about the way you speak about your tennis and about who you are. And then on top of that, I mean, right now we have 20,000 users. And so we put these videos and we put content out. Like, we make hype videos and sizzle reels on our athletes, and we put it out to all 20,000 users. So, you're getting this like brand sort of runway and kind of rising tide lifts all boats kind of scenario. And we envision, we're not doing it just yet, but we're endeavoring to, create merch packs and things like this that, might say Garrett on it or team Garrett or something. And then we would share that revenue with the athlete, right? So everything we do is to try to further the athlete. Of course, we would participate in it as well. But, if we could sell 200 hats and share half the revenue with the athlete, like that really is pretty meaningful if we get going pretty well. So
you mentioned him, Garrett Johns, the first tennis signee, captain of the Duke Blue Devils, was a singles and doubles All-American, also has the academic All-American status. So in the process of him and other players that aren't quite announced yet, how's that selection process go? How does Commonwealth decide we want to work and we want to be a partner with this player?
Yeah. So we had a fairly natural in. Steven played golf, tennis.
He's a Duke guy, yeah.
Well, so there was a fairly natural in there. But we typically talk about personality and potential. Those are the two things we talk about. And I mean, inside of personality would be character, really. You mentioned the academic All-American. I believe Cooper was as well. He was definitely academic All Big 12, but that's a very important side of the equation for us. I think it plays in a lot of different ways in an athlete's career. But usually it's us scouting digitally and just looking at results and understanding kind of who's who and some interesting results that might have happened. And then there's an outreach of some sort. Again, in this case, Steven just called the Duke head coach, and it was pretty natural in there. But, and then once we start chatting with them, it's really about, do we believe that they have the ability to reach the level that we would need them to reach. And in Garrett's case, in tennis, it's top 100 is typically the level they're trying to reach. I think between myself and Steven, that was a resounding yes with Garrett. And then you just start to get to know them a little bit. Usually at the collegiate level, there's parents involved, and so you start to understand kind of where they come from, things like that. And so we ask questions of them about like how they think of like what is being a professional athlete. What is it to you, and like how do you approach that? And so that's probably the place that I haven't seen Garrett play myself, but the place I've been the most impressed with is the way he speaks about his career, the way he approaches his career, how competitive he is and determined he is. That jumped off the page for me, like probably two calls in. I thought, he has a vision for what he's trying to do. And we're excited for him. He's early, but we think he's got the talent and the goods to get there.
It's a serious investment, so I would imagine, and as you explained, it's serious processes to get to that point. It's also a good example for young athletes about how job interviews work in the real world. So there's opportunities there. And just a final note on this, do you see an ideal roster size? Does it just keep expanding, or is that kind of down the path depending on how business goes?
Yeah, I think it's kind of you take it as it comes, but I think we want to be doing both men and women, so I think the pool size is fairly sizable. You're hearing about a lot of, again, NCAA. There's a ton of talent coming out, and then you have a ton of people at that kind of that 100 to 300 level that really just need the coaching. They need the structure around them to kind of take that last step, and so. My expectation is that there will probably be dozens a year that we could get to. I don't know that we'll get there immediately. You kind of crawl, walk, run approach. But I think when you add both men and women, I figure you should be able to do kind of 10 to 20 in each, and maybe more as we really scale up. But we want this platform to be applied to as many athletes as possible, both for business reasons, but also because we want it to power athletes. We want to solve this problem.
Well, I'm certainly rooting for it just on the sense of not just getting to know you guys and your outstanding work that you've done, but the fact that it's going to keep players in the game longer. Yeah. There's no guarantee. We know the road's tough and not everyone's going to make it, but this will give players the chance to keep the dream going, to keep the opportunity available to put work in, because the sad reality is in the last couple decades, you've had players that have tapped out because they just didn't have the resources.
Yeah, and it's sad to hear that, and there's tons of those stories out there. And we're here for those exact athletes. We can solve that challenge. We are solving that challenge. And we want to give these athletes as much runway as possible.
Brian Doxtator, Tennis Channel Inside In, guest on this week's show. You can go to joincommonwealth.com or join Commonwealth on social media. Last thing, I wanted to ask you what's up next, because I know you got the golf league coming up with your golf buddy, Marty Fish, former top 10 tennis player. He's the co-owner and GM of the Hollywood Hitters. I have this right, a par 3 grass level golf?
A grass league is what
grass
it's called.
League, okay.
But yeah, that's right. It's they're calling it high stakes par 3 golf. Okay. It's under the lights. It's a really cool story. There's a new golf course in Tempe, Arizona, outside Phoenix. 18 holes par 3, and they're doing like prize money events. And so they had one in April. I played in it. It's super fun. They have another one coming up in December, what they call a pro scratch, a pro-am. And so just playing golf with Marty and getting closer with him these last couple of years, he knew that I was talking to these. So we're the crowdfunding partner of Grass League.
Okay.
And so when I started talking to Marty about this, I was like, they're going to start selling franchises. And I think you'd be a pretty good candidate to buy into a franchise and own a team. Like, we can call it an LA team or the Hollywood team. And so, of course, it came to the Hollywood Hitters, and then now Marty has partnered with us to offer shares in the team. And so coming very soon, it's already in the app, kind of in the what we call the notify period. There's a little button you can click to say notify me when the offering goes live. And again, for $50 a share, you can own a piece of a sports franchise. And it's going to be a ton of fun. And you talk about access, they're going to throw events. We'll have, kind of boxes and suites and things like that there. And so certain investors, there'll be raffles and things like that can come in and kind of be on the inner circle and stuff. So I'm personally looking forward to that because it is a lot of fun. And I was at the event in April. And then beyond that, we've certainly got the big 4 sports in mind. I think baseball is probably a natural place to go. NFL is sitting there. But we just want to keep sort of spreading it. With that 2 years in stealth that I mentioned, we built this platform for scale. And so I think adding golf, now tennis, we're starting to really show off our speed and our ability to expand horizontally. So that's what 2025 will have in store.
Well, that's awesome. I love to hear that. And I know golf, after work and family, obviously golf's your passion too, working on your own game. That's Brian Doxtator. You can go to www.joincommonwealth.com, download the app. It's very easy, and get in the game and invest in the athletes you love. Brian, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.